Hey everyone, today's Tuesday, not Monday. I said I was going to do a tutorial on Monday, but my wife has given me so many chores since I finished uni. It's absolutely crazy. So I'm supposed to be out cleaning the shed right now. I'll do that when I finish this tutorial. So this tutorial is going to be very quick, and therefore it's not going to be on meshes because that takes a bit more explanation. I'm going to show you what singletons are. Now, singletons are another way of accessing certain classes without having to have references to them. So we've already discussed a good way of doing that, which is using events. Now, I prefer using events. Some programmers really love singletons. Some programmers really hate singletons. The idea of a singleton is we can access a class statically that isn't actually a static class. And the way I'm going to show you that is I have a main camera here, which is just the default camera with nothing on it. Obviously the default light, and a capsule. And this capsule has a player controller on it, which it doesn't do anything. But let's pretend our player controller wants to access something. So I've got three scripts. I've got my component singleton, my manager script, and my player controller script. So let's get straight into it because I'm fairly short on time. So as I said, our singletons are ways of only having one instance of a non-static class in a scene that we can access statically. In which case you might ask yourself, why don't we just make a static class? Well, sometimes we don't want to just have a static class. For example, we need to access coroutines, or we need to use the start method or the await method. We still want a mono behavior. We just don't want to constantly have to make links to that mono behavior. And we just want to be able to access it as if it were a static class, but then still do some fun stuff with it. So I've called my class component singleton. It's probably a bit silly. You could just call it singleton. I just generally create a singleton just for components, so things that I can attach to game objects, and then if I need another one for game objects or transforms or whatever, I might make another one, just so I can tweak the behavior if I need to, because we're going to be using inheritance here, and there's a good chance that components will act differently to game objects, so that's just the way I do it. You can just use a generic singleton for all of them. I would only suggest using these for things like managers. Um, Again, as I said, events I prefer because all the logic for the manager stays inside the manager. But if for some reason you just want to access a class and change something in it or tell it to do something, then this is a nice, quick, simple way to do it. Especially for a small game, you might just have one manager that runs everything, and it's just easier to call the manager's methods from your game objects rather than sending events. So the first thing we do is we use generic types. If you've ever used a list before, you will have seen that caret notation where we specify the type of the list. We do that through generics. And I'm also going to add this here, which says that T must be a component. As I said, I've called it a component singleton. All scripts are components. Anything that we can add to an object is a component. So we should be pretty safe there. But for example, if T was a game object, that wouldn't work. So we have a non-static class, but we need it to be static somehow. So we're going to add two static variables here of type T because we don't know the type. That's why we use generics. We're going to have a public static T called instance. And we're going to just do that for a sec to get rid of errors. Again, because we're going to be deriving from this base class, we've created static variables, so that variable is the same across every instance of the class in question. In fact, we will only ever get one instance of the class in question. That's the whole point. The way this works is you can never create another one by accident. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for the object to see if there's already one in the scene, or to see if there's... So the first thing we're going to do is say, hey, instance is find the object in the scene. The reason we use find object in the scene is you could have put it anywhere. You could have like a blank game object that you stick all your managers on, and so but it could also be somewhere else. But this is way more generic and robust. Now you can put it anywhere and it should find it. And then we say if instance is null. So the great thing about singletons is if you haven't put one in the scene already, like you've forgotten or it's something you don't always need, we can create one. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to place it on the camera because I like adding things to the camera. I can find things easily on the camera. Some people don't like adding things to the camera. You can change that if you want. You can, as I said, if you have some sort of object that you just pull all your managers in so you can see them easily in the inspector, go for it. I'm going to do it this way. And then we return that instance. So as you can see, the way this works is this will look for an object of whatever type you've just passed in. If there is no type, it will create one and it will add it to the camera for us, and then it will return that type. Again, if we go to use it again and it's already been created, it should just find that type, return it, find that type, return it. In this instance, if you just create one, add it to your scene and go, there is no way that you'll ever get two in the scene. There is simply no way to do it. There's no way you can do it because it just won't work. However, you could manually, and I'll show you in a second, you could manually create two in the scene and then run it, and it would probably break the singleton because there'll be two instances of the singleton in the scene and there should only ever be one, in which case you'll have to go find one and delete one. So my personal preference, if you're ever going to use singletons, is to never add them to a game object manually first. You should never need to. Just if you have a certain point that you want to add them to or a certain object, just specify that here and just let the game add them as it needs them. That means there's dynamic memory allocation and stuff but going on during the game, and sometimes it's better not to do that. But that way you never end up with a weird case where you accidentally added it to an object and then you forget and then you add it again later and then you've got two. That's not how singletons work. So because this singleton is a mono behavior, and I've discussed that mono behaviors can be useful for a number of reasons, but you don't necessarily always want to try and find the object in the scene manually every time. We can still do cool mono behavior things with it, but we can access it now as if it were static, somewhat. So let's say I've got a manager, and I want this manager to be a singleton because it's going to deal with all the logic for my game, or all the logic for part of my game. So my manager is no longer a mono behavior, it's a component singleton, right? Because we want to derive from the component singleton to make sure it only exists once in the scene. And what we have to supply the type, I know this sounds a bit silly, but it is of type my manager. So now this singleton, when we pass it in, is going to be of type my manager. So these variables will be of type my manager as well, because the generic has been cast to a my manager. And that's pretty much it. But that's pretty boring. We can't really test that. So we're going to create a public method here, public void print this, which takes a string and it just logs s, so we can test that it's working. That's pretty simple. So now this is a singleton. Like I can just use this like a normal mono behavior, but I'm guaranteed that it's only going to appear once in my scene. So in my void start, so in my player controller, what I'm going to do is I want to talk to my manager. I want to print something. I want my manager to print something, but I don't want to have to either link my manager in the inspector. I keep pointing at the screen. I either don't want to have to link my manager in the editor, so I could come in here, create a public variable, drag the script onto the camera, and then drag the camera onto here, so I can access its script. I could do that, but that's just a lot of work. I could basically do what I've done in my component singleton and find object of type, but I have to be careful that there's only ever one in the scene and that I don't accidentally instantiate more than one. Yeah, it's both of those are acceptable, but if you want to, for some reason, talk to your manager a lot, it just gets annoying. So the singleton sort of gets around that problem. So basically what I do is I say my manager. So I want my manager, but I want its instance. So that's why we have that public variable called instance. So we say my manager dot instance. So get the instance of this manager, and then print this. So I am using this statically in a sense. I mean, I have to add this extra instance keyword here, but I don't have to instantiate anything. In fact, it's going to do it for me. And you can see that my main camera currently has nothing on it. And then when I run the game, I get in my manager, and my console has printed test. Now, it's sort of hard to show that this doesn't ever break. I mean, it can't break. That's the whole point. But if I was to then... Oops, what am I doing? If I was to then do this, this is sort of... I'm calling the same function over and over again. And I won't run this for too long because it'll spam my console. But you can see that even though I just called test 52 times, that it only added the my manager script once. Because initially on the very first frame, it looks for instance. It can't find instance, and therefore it created one and returned it. And then every subsequent time it found instance, there's only ever going to be one case of that being in the scene, and then it's just going to keep returning it. If you are really, I guess, specific and clever about putting all your managers in on the same object, and you're always going to do them manually, you can potentially remove the find object of type and just get component from a certain object, and that might speed things up. That's like a pretty hefty... It's going to iterate through like everything to find that instance. If you've got a big scene and you're constantly trying to get the singleton, this might slow things down. So you might want to find a better way to make sure that your singletons are all initialized first, and then just access them statically. But yeah, that's a singleton. That's how you use one. You can lock them if you need to. You will probably want to sort of search for that stuff yourself. It's pretty simple to do. I've never really run into a case where I've needed to lock my singleton, but I'm sure there are good reasons for doing that. Maybe if you're running timers or something, for example, you want to make sure you lock your singleton so you're not overriding any coroutines that are running. You can do logic checks as well in your singleton to make sure that there's only ever one in the scene. I think, if from memory, and sorry I don't have time to check, I think the Unify wiki has a really good Unity singleton script that does do locking and also checks to make sure that there's only ever one in the scene, which will just throw you a message and says, hey, you've accidentally put two of these things in the scene, maybe delete one. So yeah, if you don't want to use events and they're too hard, potentially look at using a singleton. They're good, they're useful. I used multiple singletons, but I used the singleton structure in one of my games recently. And when I finished the project, I felt like I'd abused them a little too much, and maybe I shouldn't have used them as often as I did. But they did make messaging other objects a lot easier. So thank you for watching. Hopefully this didn't go for half an hour again. As usual, please like, please subscribe. Sorry this is really quick. I'll try and do a fancier one in a couple of days if I have time. I think I finally have work starting next week. I've been waiting for that to happen. So I'll do my best, but thanks for watching.